all you glorious gamers out there. Welcome to the PlayersToo Podcast, the video game podcast for gamers like you, by gamers like you. You can find PlayersToo on all the social media, that's Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, the lot. You can also find our written content over at PlayersToo.com, that's PlayerStoo.com. And if you could take 5 seconds to give us 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, it really helps us out. It does a huge amount for the exposure of the show, and thank you so much to anyone that's already done that for us. While you're over there, if you could leave us a little review as well. Again, it just helps us out so much, and thank you again to anyone that's already done that for us. You're an absolute legend to us. Alright, and on with the show. My name is Mark Henderson. With me, as always, still in his lockdown cupboard, Mr. Lewis Camley. How's it going, Lewis?
It's going very well, Mark. Yeah, good to be here. Good to be talking to you again. I feel sort of under pressure to say something quirky every week at this point, but the days, Mark, are so similar right now between work and lockdown and the encroaching darkness. I don't feel like anything has happened since we last spoke to each other. Yeah, that's how I'm doing. How are you?
Well, encroaching darkness aside, it's not bad. I mean, try and not make Scotland out to be quite so bleak. Anyway, Lewis, what have you been playing this week to cheer yourself up from that encroaching darkness?
Well, to cheer myself up, Mark, might not be the right phrase at all, but I've just been playing more Hollow Knight, to be honest. But I'm actually going to puncture that little bit of negativity about the game that I was just hinting at there, because I, Mark, have finally just found my feet with this game.
Yes! I knew it would come, Lewis. I knew it would come.
Yeah, you could probably detect that a wee bit last week, that I was starting to kind of get into the rhythm of it a little bit and kind of understand, you know, where the enjoyment lies in it. And that's, I don't really have too much to say this week because the game hasn't changed too much. I haven't progressed that far, but I'm just a couple of sections ahead of where I was last week. I've beaten a couple of bosses. I now have the Dream Nail, and that's opened up a whole nother section of what the game is and what happens in it, which I don't really know too much about yet, actually. And it's the kind of thing, because obviously you've already beaten Hollow Knight a good long while ago now, you periodically will say things to me like, blah, 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 Dream Nail, or blah, 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 Dream Boss. And I've just the whole time been like, okay, cool. And
yeah, you don't need to worry about it just now, but as long as you have that reference for later on when it comes up, it's all you need to know, man. It's all you need to know. Don't worry about it just now. It's
exactly
all good.
So that was just quite a nice, satisfying moment when that happened, and I was kind of like, okay, this is genuine progress. This isn't just I've completed as much of a section as I can currently do, but instead I'm progressing the story. Something big is happening and changing in the world. So
yeah, that's like a proper milestone, you know.
Totally, yeah. That combined with like the general growth in the game, things like the more skills I've acquired just make it slightly more fun to play. I'm now starting to have to think more about which charms to equip, you know, every time I can enter a new section or every time I'm heading towards a new area, and also thinking about what I want to go and spend my money on, or do I want to save up some geo and then return to one of the shops before I take on another section to get another charm notch or to get another particular charm or a mask shard or whatever it might be. That kind of depth of gameplay has started to come in for me now, which it hadn't been there before. At the start and a few weeks ago, and particularly around the Mantis Lords, which I think is just a badly placed piece of the game. I think that without that horror show and that difficulty right at the beginning, when you're actually making progress through this, Mark, it isn't as difficult as you think it is. There's a really clear rhythm to what you're kind of supposed to be doing in terms of like getting through an area, getting the various secrets that are there, saving up some geo, collecting all the collectibles and the secrets, and then getting out and upgrading and thinking about your skill set, and then getting back in and doing another area or tracking back and unlocking new things. So yeah, I just finally feel like it's clicked into place a bit in the last week to 2 weeks, really. It's not so much just the gameplay from this week, but it's just been this building of confidence, I think, in what I'm doing in the game. So finally, Mark, I'm there.
Nice one, man. Well, I'm very, very, very glad to hear that you are now enjoying it as much as I hoped that you would. So that is really genuinely good to hear, because I thought initially that, oh my God, have I just burdened him with something that he's going to hate and resent the whole time that he's playing? But in actual fact, I'm really genuinely glad to hear that you've now kind of turned that corner and you're appreciating the game for how good it is. And I think that it's actually very analogous to the game that I have just finished now, which is Bloodborne. So last week I was talking about how I decided to go for the platinum, and I did get that platinum, which was genuinely one of the proudest things I've achieved in a video game. Like, it's one of the things that I'm probably most proud of, because when I started playing that game maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, I'm not quite sure how long ago it was that I actually started it with earnest, I wasn't even sure that I was going to finish the game, and now I'm sitting here with the platinum, So
amazing,
that was a genuinely big achievement. And honestly, there's also a boss I think that is quite badly placed in terms of difficulty, which is the second real boss that you have to fight, that is the second boss that you have to fight. And his name's Father Gascoigne, and it is such a dramatic spike in difficulty. And I think that the second proper boss that you have to fight in Hollow Knight is the Mantis Lords, which again is just such a massive spike in difficulty from the previous boss fights. And I think that it's quite easy to be put off by that. But the way that you described Hollow Knight and what you're supposed to be doing, and you're basically doing runs, aren't you?
Yeah,
you're basically going into an area, running through it, trying to find all the items, accumulate as much currency as possible, whether that's Blood Echoes in Bloodborne or Geo in Hollow Knight. Get out, use that to your advantage to improve yourself in some capacity, then dive back in and do it again, and then maybe you'll get to the boss this time, and then it's just rushing the boss until you get past that, And could easily be said for Bloodborne at the same time as well. Yeah, so I think that the fact that we were playing both these games at the same time is actually quite interesting, because they're obviously sort of two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, the real parallels between them, definitely, yeah.
But Lewis, I have to say, Bloodborne is completely won me over in the same capacity as Hollow Knight did, to be completely honest with you. Like, I went into Hollow Knight expecting to like it more than I expected to like Bloodborne going into Bloodborne. But honestly, like, Bloodborne is genuinely one of the best games I've ever played. I can really hardly criticise it in any capacity whatsoever. It is that good. It really has to be lauded as one of the best video games that I have ever played. And I think that you also have to play this very soon, because I have to talk to someone about it, and you're public enemy number one when it comes to that, so you need to deal with it.
Fair enough. I can take that on just so that you've got a pal to talk to about it. That seems fair enough.
Thanks, man. Probably doesn't say a lot about all the friends I've got, eh? All right, listen, on that incredibly sad and depressing note for me, on to the news. All right, and news item number one. And Lewis, mere hours ago, Cyberpunk 2077 has been delayed again. The original release date for this game was April the 16th this year, which at this point is laughable. It was then delayed until September the 17th, then it was delayed until November the 19th, and now it has been delayed until December the 10th. And CDPR have made this statement on Twitter.
Today, we've decided to move the release date of Cyberpunk 2077 by 21 days. The new release date is December 10th. Most likely, there are many emotions and questions in your heads, so first and foremost, please accept our humble apologies. The biggest challenge for us right now is shipping the game on current gen, next gen and PC at the same time, which requires us to prepare and test 9 versions of it. Xbox One, compatibility on Xbox Series X, PS4, compatibility on PS5, PC and Stadia, while working from home. Since Cyberpunk 2077 evolved towards almost being a next-gen title somewhere along the way, we need to make sure everything works well and every version runs smoothly. We're aware it might seem unrealistic when someone says that 21 days can make any difference in such a massive and complex game, but they really do. Some of you might also be wondering what these words mean in light of us saying we achieved Gold Master some time ago. Passing certification, or going gold, means the game is ready, can be completed and has all the content in it, but it doesn't mean we stop working on it and raising the quality bar. On the contrary, this is the time where many improvements are being made, which will then be distributed via a Day Zero patch. This is the time period we undercalculated. We feel we have an amazing game in our hands and are willing to make every decision, even the hardest ones, if it ultimately leads to you getting a video game you'll fall in love with.
So this is interesting for a number of reasons. Firstly, because Jeff Keighley has now announced that due to the new release date of the game, it will miss the nominations window for the 2020 Game Awards. Something similar happened with Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order last year and Smash Bros. Ultimate the year before, which, to be honest with you, sucks. Because a lot of the Discord around 2020, the games that were coming out in 2020, the Game of the Year nominations that would likely be in 2020, all of those conversations had Cyberpunk in them. Every single one of them. And I feel as though the Game Awards this year, just by missing out on Cyberpunk, because it is such a big deal, is sort of misrepresenting the year. Maybe that's too strong a term, but I don't think it's a true reflection of what 2020 will be just because Cyberpunk isn't there. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, yeah. And I think you're right that representing the year is maybe a bit too strong, but I completely agree with what you're saying, that to have a lot of these categories and awards being discussed, and just generally that kind of like summary of the year type thing, which obviously Cyberpunk can still fit into people's kind of best games of 2020 if it does hit the December 10th release date. But yeah, not having it be featured in those kinds of, particularly the Game Awards, being that it's such a big moment in the calendar, it's disappointing. Yeah, it's not ideal for the game or for obviously the people who are dying to get playing it.
No, absolutely not. It is really disappointing because I think that people will be voting on these Game Awards, particularly members of the gaming press and even other gamers out there for some of the fan awards, will be thinking in the back of their head, well, Cyberpunk would have won this, or Cyberpunk would have won that, like even if it wasn't out and out Game of the Year, you know what I mean, or that game shouldn't be here because Cyberpunk should be here, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It just colours the whole landscape just because such a big, prominent game that has been so highly anticipated for so long is just not going to be there, and it's going to fall in this really awkward, ugly window where we won't be talking about it winning Game of the Year awards until next year. And by that time, a whole slew of next-gen games will be out, so who knows? I mean, I reckon it's probably going to stack up pretty bloody well, personally, but you don't know, do you know what I mean? You don't know if it's going to really get the accolades it most likely will deserve when it actually comes out, you know? And obviously, the last time we spoke about Cyberpunk was when they introduced their 6 weeks of mandatory crunch. So now we can guess that 6 weeks is now 9 weeks. And at the time when they introduced the mandatory crunch, one of the heads of the studio spoke about how most of the studio understood and, by all accounts, was on board with the 6 weeks of mandatory crunch for most of them, although that is very much up for debate, I would say. I wonder how many of those people would have been on board if that 6 weeks of mandatory crunch that they pseudo agreed to actually increased by 50% to 9 weeks, really not that long into that period. So that sucks a lot. And honestly, I don't want to get into a whole second long rant about how crunch fucking sucks. Whether it's mandatory or otherwise, it can quite literally ruin people's lives. So just remember, when you play this game, the potential suffering that people had to go through. I mean, I know that sounds dramatic, but people have literally given up time with their families, their own personal time, when they should have been not working on this game and should have been living their life, but ultimately had to give their life to a job that I hope is going to be more thankful in the future, because right now the games industry just does not thank these people well enough for the amount of time and effort and energy they have to put into these games. And all of that fucking sucks that I have to think about that when I'm going to be playing Cyberpunk, because I don't want to be thinking about that when I'm playing Cyberpunk, because Cyberpunk looks so fucking incredibly good. But quite genuinely, I'll be thinking about that when I play it.
It'll be hard not to, yeah, particularly because we have been talking about it so much. And I think the key there is as well that, you know, loads of games have crunch. You know, I'm sure I've played and you've played games that you're not even aware that there's been significant crunch on or whatever. The kicker for me in this regard is that CDPR have been so, or at least were, so keen to stress that there would not be any crunch. You know, they sought out media opportunities to say that wouldn't happen. And they also, in the past, rightly so in some senses, have made big statements about we'll delay a game as often as we need to in order for it to be right. I think they've quite famously said about Cyberpunk, because it was first teased like 7 years ago, the game will come out when it's ready, sort of with a wink almost. And that's fine, and that's a bold and good strategy to say these games will take as long as they need. But it is exactly this, when you're then trying to hit essentially arbitrary deadlines that you've created because you've said the game has to come out at this point, and then you start to slip on those, and it means that the developers are working long days for much longer. And I mean, we're saying mandatory crunch, we're well aware that crunch has been going on in that team for longer than this 6 or 9 week period.
Over a year now. Over a year it's been going on for.
Yeah, and there was also a suggestion that I saw on Jason Schreier's Twitter that the devs hadn't been told about this until the public was, that the message went around at the same time. Obviously some team members will know, some won't perhaps, but I mean, if that's true as well, that's really not ideal. Yeah, it's just a murky thing hanging over this game, which we will be talking about when it releases. It's unavoidable when this game drops and the reviews start hitting. These issues will and very much should be mentioned, you know?
Yeah, and it is always worth bearing in mind. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have any reflection on the quality of the game. Like, I really don't doubt that the quality of this game is going to be unbelievable. Like, I think that everyone who plays this game is going to be completely blown away by the dedication of these people to produce something of the absolute highest quality. That is the standard that everyone is expecting for this game. I mean, I don't think that's any sort of overstatement, you know? We are expecting the best of the best. And it looks as if it's going to live up to that. But at the same time, this conversation can't go away because the game is great. Like, that doesn't make it worth it. Like, that isn't evidence that, oh, it's all good because the game turned out good. You know, it's still a problem that these people had to give up a lot of their lives for over a year or perhaps longer to produce that game for you. Like, that can't be the way that we continue. The fact that this period of mandatory crunch has went from 6 weeks to 9 weeks is not because that crunch is going to get any easier. Like, that's not letting anyone off the hook in terms of time. That just means that they're going to be crunching for an extra 3 weeks now. It's not that it's got any easier for anyone, you know what I mean? It's just got longer.
Yeah, it doesn't spread those hours out at all. It just adds more. And it sounds like that's what they need to do to get the game over the line. And so it's only likely that more will be added, more hours will have to be pulled if more issues come up, you know, in that time frame. So yeah, it's not a great look for this game at all. Like you say, hopefully when the game drops, people can kind of be thankful to the developers. And I think the real thing here is that we as gamers, we're not really the main deciders of whether or not it's been a success in that regard. We can love the game and it can feel like the best game ever made even, but if you're sat working in that studio and you feel like you've been broken, then the publisher, the whole team has to consider what success really looks like to them. Because if you've really damaged some people, or some, you know, you're always keen to point out a lot of people might leave the industry because of jobs like this. That's not for us to say, well, this game's a success because it's brilliant and it was great fun to play. You know, really, the developers have a say there in how successful this game is if it has absolutely fucking ruined them, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, from that side of things, whether or not this game is a success is not for us as gamers to decide. Like, this game's going to be great. I really have no doubt about that whatsoever. I truly believe that this game is going to come out and it's going to blow everyone away by how incredibly dense and detailed and amazing it plays and looks. I genuinely believe that, but that does not make this game necessarily a success from a development point of view. And the way that we develop games has to change, because things like this can't continue, because the video games industry is growing at such an exponential rate, and the talent the video games industry is able to retain is staying flat at best or going down, because very talented people can get better paying jobs and work less hours in other sectors of programming, for example. You know what I mean? It doesn't have to be video games, and that loss is real, and that loss will absolutely reflect in the quality of video games across the board, you know, and could perpetuate more crunch just because you have less capable people working on the game trying to get something done in the same amount of time as someone better than they are. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the retention of experienced staff is very difficult as well. A lot of the people who work in the video games industry don't last very long in the video games industry, which means that the people working on the games in the video games industry are all relatively fresh-faced. There are relatively few very experienced staff members, which is a real issue in any industry, never mind video games. But yeah, it sucks that we have to talk about this around this game, which I'm so excited about. Like, I cannot stress to anyone listening to this enough. Like, I'm so excited about Cyberpunk, but this conversation can't go away. Do you know what I mean? It's important, and it's important that it changes. Alright, and news item number 2. PlayStation has announced that Destruction AllStars has been delayed until February. Now, this game was slated to be a launch title for the PS5, and this makes it the second launch title that has been delayed recently after Deathloop. However, it has been announced that when the game launches in February, that it will be available for free on PlayStation Plus for 2 months. Now, Lewis, I think it's fair to say that me and you don't particularly have much interest in this game. However, this is another game that PlayStation said would be there at launch and ultimately is no longer there at launch. But more interestingly, I think anyway, is the fact that it's coming to PlayStation Plus for free when it releases. So this to me seems to be piggybacking off the success of Fall Guys, right? I mean, I wonder how much the success of Fall Guys, which came to PlayStation Plus when it came out, generated a huge amount of buzz and a huge influx of players when it first came out. And I think that they obviously want the same trajectory for Destruction AllStars. Honestly, I'm not sure how much of a splash that this game can make, really. I don't think it looks particularly great. I've not really heard much buzz around it at all. But at least in doing this and allowing it to be free for those 2 months gives it the best chance to make some sort of splash, you know?
I think that's absolutely it, Mark. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if this delay was solely for that reason. Because, like you said, I mean, we certainly have no interest in this game. I've never been particularly impressed by anything that they've shown from it so far. And, you know, and all games will find a bit of an audience, I'm sure, but it's also a very crowded space, that kind of online multiplayer chaotic action. I mean, it looks so much like a cross between, you know, Rocket League and various other types of games of that nature that it's hard to see how it was going to stand out. But coupled with the idea that it was coming at the launch of the console for, you know, $70, £60, whatever that was going to be, you know, a full price next gen title, I just really was struggling to see where the player base was going to come from, particularly because it doesn't feel like even Sony have been pushing it all that hard. You know, it's not one of the major games that people are talking about around the launch of the next gen. So pushing it to February, and critically, as you were saying, Mark, putting it there on PS Plus, meaning probably tens of millions of people on PS Plus in one form or another can access it, will download it. There might not be too much out at that point where people, you know, are too busy with other games, but they might pick it up to try it. And like we saw with Fall Guys, which is also a fantastic game, it should be said, it might be able to gather up a bit of an audience then. I do worry about its longer term success though, you know, and unless it really manages to capture attention right then, I think it will struggle to stay alive.
Yeah, I would say that's probably a pretty good summary of my feelings on it as well. Although this game almost certainly isn't a game changer for anyone, I am slightly conscious now that this is two games that PlayStation said would be there at the launch of their new console that now aren't, after people have pre-ordered the consoles and whatever. And like I said, I know that this isn't a title that is likely to have made a huge difference to many people. It's new IP. As you said, no one's really massively talking about it, although they did push it in their new UI video. It was one of the games that was shown off there. But I don't think that the delay of this game is going to be a massive game changer in terms of someone pre-ordering the console. But principally, I don't think it's very good. You know, I mean, it's just another little sour note from PlayStation recently, and it feels as though there's been a lot of those recently. I don't know, what are your thoughts on that, I suppose? I
mean, I think you're right about that. Like, it's not a game that I think that people are going to be crying over it not being there, and I certainly can't imagine who out there has cancelled their pre-order or decided not to get a PS5 soon because that's not there. But yeah, it's another little chip off the proposition of getting the console at launch. I think vitally, yeah, it's just not great to be delaying a game this close to the launch of the console. You know, what are we, 3 weeks or so out? That's pretty late to be announcing it, and particularly if
exactly, something that was promised to be there for day one and they're announcing it at this point and it's going to be delayed until February. Do you know what I mean? It's not as if it's even been delayed like Cyberpunk is for like a few weeks. It's going to be a few months. You know?
That's kind of important as well. I think that if it's a delay by choice because they think that they're sending it out to die if they put it out at launch at full price, then they should have told us that before now, I think is kind of important thing here, because to have got some pre-sales on it, or to have people thinking that's the game I'm going to be playing, and maybe thinking about it slightly differently, if you've got streamers, if you've got content creators out there who were looking at that as being the big day one multiplayer game on PS5, really, that was something new that a lot of people might be looking to check out, then a lot of those people might have lost interest in it, or might not bother getting back round to it when it comes in February, because by that point there'll be all sorts of other things, or Fortnite will be, you know, the full next gen version of that will be available and all sorts of things. So I don't think it's critical. It's like you said before, it's just another little mark against what Sony have been doing recently, but I don't think anyone's going to be, you know, throwing their console out the window because of this.
No, I don't think so either, I've got to admit. All right, Lewis, news item number 3. It has recently been revealed that deleting your Facebook account will also delete your Oculus information, including your achievements and all your purchases. This follows an announcement that was made back in August that Oculus users will require a Facebook account to use their VR headsets, and this actually came into effect this month. However, when you now try to deactivate or delete your Facebook account, you are hit with the following messages by Facebook.
So yeah, when you go to deactivate, you are presented with a warning which includes: you also will not be able to access Oculus products or your Oculus information. And when you go to fully delete your account, you're presented with a message: deleting your Facebook account will also delete your Oculus information. This includes your app purchases and your achievements. You will no longer be able to return any apps and will lose any existing store credits.
Now, despite how obviously bullshit this is, Facebook VR boss Andrew Bosworth has said that he is still a big fan of the move. He also said that people should continue to make sure their Facebook accounts are in, quotes, good standing before they buy a headset. Now, that is something absolutely nobody should have to concern themselves with when they are buying a new piece of hardware for any capacity, VR or otherwise. But Mr. Bosworth seems to think that that is a good idea. He has also claimed that Google, Apple and Xbox all make you sign into accounts to get access to their platforms. And that's the same thing, right? Oh wait, obviously not, because they do not force you to maintain a social media account run by a company that has a sketchy, at best, record with things like collating and using your data for shitty reasons. So this fucking sucks, Lewis.
Yeah, really, really not great. I mean, I can't imagine how many people have been put off ever buying Oculus because of this, and the whole notion of having to have a Facebook account just to play it, just to access it. I mean, the keeping your account in good standing line is fucking bizarre. I can't work out.
That's some Orwellian shit, that, man.
I know, it's like,
that's weird.
Behave yourself for
like
Zuckerberg, or you can't get playing your VR games. It's nonsense. You're quite right in saying that it's not an equal comparison to other companies. Yes, they make you have accounts, but they're not accounts of the similar kind at all. I mean, it's a completely different proposition. So, yeah, what are they thinking here? How could they think that people are going to be okay with this?
I don't know, man. And fuck you, Facebook. Honestly, like, massively fuck you, Facebook. They have ruined one of the most important and prominent companies in the VR headspace over utter bullshit. And I don't want to say that I hope that they fail, but I hope that this fails enough or goes badly enough for them, whether it be from a PR standpoint or whether it be from the fact that nobody wants to buy an Oculus anymore, that they have to rethink this, because this is very, very obviously bullshit and is all about what Facebook is really all about, which is collecting your fucking data. And I think that they just want that included in your Facebook account rather than having to go through a separate Oculus account for no reason whatsoever, other than it would make it easier for them to collect your data. That's literally the only reason I can think that they would want to do this.
Yeah, it keeps all of your gameplay data, all of your purchasing data in the same place as all of your other Facebook data, which obviously then connects up to your Instagram account and your WhatsApp account and all of these things. It's just typical big business consolidation in one sense, but yeah, the fact that it's all underpinned by the notion of having to maintain a social media profile that you probably don't want anymore. The fact that you can't delete this, even if you still have the login, you can't delete your Facebook profile without deleting your Oculus saves. It's mental. They're completely unconnected, except
your
on the back
purchases,
end.
Any game that you have purchased is tied to that account. So if you delete that account, all those games are gone. That is mind-blowingly bullshit, and so obviously bullshit for this guy to come out and say, oh, I think this is a great idea, in a very Trump-esque way, it has to be said. Oh, man, honestly, I can smell the bullshit from here, man. It's ridiculous. All right, and news item number 4. Xbox boss Phil Spencer has hinted at TV streaming, quotes, sticks for xCloud, as well as additional tiers for Games Pass. Now, this is in an interview with Stratechery. I'm not really sure how to say this word, and neither is Lewis, and Lewis has an English lit degree, so this is a bullshit word. However, on Stratechery, which is how I'm choosing to say it, Phil Spencer made this statement.
I think you're going to see lower priced hardware as part of our ecosystem when you think about streaming sticks and other things that somebody might want to just go plug into their TV and go play via xCloud. You could imagine us even having something that we just included in the Game Pass subscription that gave you an ability to stream xCloud games to your television and buying the controller. Now,
this is interesting for 2 reasons, I think. One, this puts them very much in the realm of Stadia and Luna, way more than they already were. I mean, obviously these were competing systems anyway, but xCloud was always tied to hardware, whether that be an Xbox or a PC, whereas Stadia and Luna are much more of getting rid of that hardware and not needing that hardware, and literally only needing something you plugged into the back of your TV, whether that be a Chromecast or the Amazon Fire Stick or whatever it ends up being, and a controller and an internet connection, and you're away, And I was sort of always thinking in the back of my head, although we never spoke about this on the podcast, when Xbox were going to do this, because it seemed like the next logical step, However, reason number 2 I think this is interesting is that I think that step undermines specifically the Xbox Series S, but their console launch in general. And therefore I am surprised that Spencer has hinted at this moment, pre-launch, when we are weeks away. You know what I mean? It just seems like a very odd thing to have suddenly dropped. Because if I can pay my Games Pass subscription with xCloud attached to it as it currently is, and buy a USB that I can just stick into the back of my TV, then I might rather do that than have to spend another 250 quid or whatever it ends up being for the Series S on just owning another console and just another console taking up space underneath my television, you know? If I could just stick a USB in the back of my TV, I might be pretty happy with that, you know?
I think you're right there in terms of replacing the functionality of in our gaming lives at least, of the Series S. It is an interesting proposal. I mean, there had been rumours that this might be what the Series S was before that was actually announced.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, absolutely. And there was hardware developed by Microsoft along these lines that was cancelled, but it sounds as if it's still very much a possibility, according to Phil Spencer, anyway.
Yeah, I think it probably is the future of this strategy that we're seeing from Xbox just now. There was the story months ago, possibly at the end of last year, where we heard that Xbox or Microsoft generally and Samsung were kind of doing some work together. And we talked a little bit then about the idea of Samsung TVs coming preloaded with an xCloud app effectively. And I mean, launching their own stick would be one way to do it, obviously. If we reach a point where Microsoft can get, the Xbox gaming app onto existing, Fire Sticks and Chromecast and all of these devices that people have at the moment, at that point it becomes almost ubiquitous, right? Anyone can access it kind of instantly. At the moment there's still this barrier of, I have to go and buy the Xbox thing, I need to go and buy this Xbox stick and a controller. But if we reach a point where you can access it on a Fire Stick that's already plugged into your TV, and you can use any controller that you have lying about that you can just connect up via Bluetooth, then that suddenly really does open up their market to a really massive exponential possibility,
Yeah, well, I completely agree. And that's why I think it is so odd that Phil Spencer has chose to mention this now. Because to me, this completely, specifically the Series S, but kind of undermines their console launch if this is the way that he sees Xbox and xCloud moving in the future, you know what I mean? Because one of the questions I was going to ask you was, how do you think in that world Luna and Stadia could possibly stack up to Microsoft and xCloud and Games Pass? You know what I mean? In terms of the games that are available there, in terms of the customer loyalty that is there, to me there is just no comparison. So they would immediately walk in and dominate. And if everyone can access all your Games Pass games from basically any screen that they can shove a USB stick into, and your phone as well, obviously, and hopefully by that time you would have it on iOS devices. If I can then play Assassin's Creed, say, on any of those devices without actually needing your hardware, then aren't you undermining your hardware that you're currently just trying to sell everyone?
It's a good point, Mark, but that's what we've been talking about around Xbox for so long now, is they're taking moves which seem to suggest that owning the box isn't really that important to them anymore. The language Phil Spencer uses here, he says things like, I think you're going to see, or you could imagine us even having blah blah blah. It feels to me like he's kind of saying these things are in the pipeline, they're probably a long ways off, as you're suggesting. He doesn't want to undercut sales of the boxes that are about to launch, but I could see a world where in a couple of years' time, if the Series S in particular is starting to look slightly obsolete, that this becomes one of the options for upgrading. So you might be able to get the Series S2, which looks a lot more like the current Series X does, and there's a new Series X2 and it's got slightly better specs, but then they introduce this stick underneath all of that to say, actually, this is the lowest bar of entry. You can just get this and have access to things. But that's why I'm bringing up the possibility of them appearing on other platforms, though, other sticks, for want of a better phrase, because it removes the need for them to produce anything. They are just selling new games and selling new subscriptions,
an app, basically, as well.
Yeah.
And the reason why I think that the Series S is particularly in jeopardy here is because all these streaming services are offering you 4K, 60 frames per second, ray tracing the business. Do you know what I mean? They're all saying we can do this with our massive data centers. And just this week it has been announced that the special edition of Devil May Cry 5 won't have all the upgrades it has on the Series X on the Series S, and I think there was another game as well, it slipped my mind, that basically it wasn't going to have the same ray tracing capabilities on the Series S as it would on the Series X, and it wouldn't run as high a frame rate as well. So you were already seeing games won't just look a little bit better on the Series X, like they will fundamentally run differently and worse on the Series S, you know. And if you could just plug a USB into the back of your TV with a stable internet connection, and you can see a 4K 120 frames per second version of that game rather than playing it on your local box for a cheaper point of entry, why wouldn't you do that? Alright, and finishing off as we always do with a couple of shout outs. Shout out number 1, Ghost Runner has come out this week. This is the game that is basically a 3D version of Katana Zero, so it has 3D platforming, melee, bullet time, and instant respawns when you die. It's currently sitting at an 82 on Metacritic, and Lewis, you played Katana Zero, and I knew that you were sort of semi-interested in this game. Any chance you will actually play it?
That's a good question, Mark. I am interested in this, and I've watched a lot of gameplay trailers and kind of long features on it and stuff, because exactly as you said, it's drawing these comparisons to Katana Zero, which I played earlier this year and really, really enjoyed. And there's things about this that I think look really great. I'm less keen on first-person perspective, but that's just personal taste more than anything else. But yeah, what you said there, any chance I'll play it. I feel like this game is coming out at the wrong time, really. I mean, this is the busiest part of the year for game releases, generally speaking, and there's the console generation shift, weeks away, plus, Cyberpunk and plenty of other games between now and Christmas. If this had come out in like June, I might have been more likely to play it, I think, but it's on the maybe pile. It'll probably be one on my backlist pile when we come to talk about the end of the next generation.
Alright, and shout out number 2, the Pokemon DLC Crown Tundra has also come out this week. This is the second piece of DLC for Sword and Shield after the Isle of Armor, which came out in the summer. Included in the DLC are lots more legendaries, new maps, yada yada. It's all the same stuff. It's basically more Pokemon. What I would say about this is that I don't think that it's generated a huge amount of buzz in the gaming space. I don't really think that the first DLC created much buzz either, but I think it generated more than this. And I wonder from Pokemon's perspective, as in the Pokemon company's perspective, how well the DLC has gone versus releasing a third and fourth game in this generation. So thinking of like Sun and Moon, then came Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, you know what I mean, changing up the game and basically selling everyone a very, very similar game to the original game that they bought again. And I wonder, even though obviously the DLC would have been significantly less in terms of cost, would it have sold enough versus how many of those physical copies would have sold, and how much buzz would have been generated, and how much sort of ancillary sales you might have got of the original title just by Pokemon being in the headlines quite a lot. I wonder how successful they think this DLC has went versus that kind of tried and true Pokemon option of just releasing the same game twice with very minor changes and everyone buying it again anyway.
Do you not think that they might do that, but just with the DLC bundled in as well at some point?
Maybe they will, Lewis. Maybe they will. I think that they already have options to buy the game with the DLC anyway. They sold both of the DLC earlier this year before either of them were out in a pack as well, which I actually considered buying at the time. But I don't know if they would do anything more now. Like, I don't know if we're getting Ultra Sword and Ultra Shield at any point soon, you know what I mean?
Well, exactly, yeah. That was what I was thinking, are we going to get Shield, Sword, and then Spear, and that one has those new areas but just new content in them as well or something, It feels like they'll find a way to make the money on it.
Yeah, I'm sure they will. No doubt, man. No doubt at all. Alright, shout out number 3. Kojima Productions, Lewis, has announced that they are actively developing a new game and are hiring for their Tokyo studio. This is very exciting because anything Kojima does is very exciting. But the speculation around this has been wild and has ranged from everything to Death Stranding 2 to the new Silent Hill game, obviously. Although Kojima had previously said that they are working on multiple projects all at the one time, including manga, anime, episodic titles, digital-only games, as well as, quotes, the next big game. Kojima has also announced this year that a major project of theirs got cancelled earlier this year without saying what it was. So, Lewis, basically, fuck knows what this is, but it's exciting that it's happening.
Yeah, exactly that. It's just great to know that something is in the pipeline and that they are hopefully in the not too distant future going to be sharing stuff with us. But we've gone round the houses on Kojima rumours a few times now, so it's hard to say what else it could be.
Yes, we have. All right, and final shout out number 4. I think it would be remiss of us not to say that the first pictures of Tom Holland playing Nathan Drake have been released. Twitter went mental for this list. What are your thoughts?
I mean, he looks more the part than I thought he was going to. When he was first announced as being cast as Nathan Drake, it felt wrong to me because he looks like a little boy and Nathan Drake doesn't. But yeah, I mean, I'll probably watch this just because it will probably turn up on a streaming service or whatever eventually and watch it on some slow Sunday afternoon. But God, I'm so sick of video games as movies that I just can't get excited about it at all.
Yeah, I must admit, he wouldn't have been my first choice, is basically what I would say about that. But honestly, I don't think this movie is going to be any good at all. So therefore, I really don't care who's in it because I'm probably not going to watch it and it's not going to be any good anyway. So I don't care. Like, I literally don't care. People were awash with hot takes on this, but my stance on it is I simply do not care. And it's interesting that today, Lewis, the news also broke that they are going to be making a Netflix series based on Assassin's Creed as well. So even more video games made into new media. Not that I have a problem with that in principle, it's just rarely done well. Yeah. It's very rarely done well. All right, Lewis, and with that, time for a beer and we'll be back with Topic of the Week. And we are back for Topic of the Week. Topic of the Week this week is the next-gen launch titles. Now, the reason that we are talking about this now is because, well, it's 2 weeks until the consoles start launching. We now know what the launch lineups largely look like, but also tying into the fact that PlayStation have now delayed 2 of their would-be launch titles, and obviously Xbox had delayed Halo a few months ago now. So what are we looking at launch? And I've got a list here of both console launch titles. I'm not sure that they are entirely comprehensive, but I think that the vast majority of the system-selling games will be on these lists. So in terms of third party, you've got Devil May Cry 5 Special Edition, Dirt 5, FIFA 21, Fortnite, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, Observation, Marvel's Avengers, Watch Dogs Legion, NBA 2K21, Destiny 2 and Call of Duty Black Ops. Now, they are all third party, obviously, and obviously will be available on both consoles. But in terms of exclusives, which I think really do drive console sales, particularly early doors, PlayStation have got Marvel Spider-Man Miles Morales, Astro's Playroom, which will be preloaded onto the console, Demon's Souls, Sackboy: A Big Adventure, The Pathless, Godfall and Bugsnax. And Xbox Series X/S have got Gears Tactic, Gears 5's, Bright Memory, Tetris Effect Connected, The Falconeer, Yakuza Like a Dragon and Grounded. Now, I think it's safe to say, being the Sony ponies that we are, taking into consideration, of course, but I think that in terms of those exclusives at launch, PlayStation are winning that hands down, really, in terms of the quality of games that we can expect to play day one on this console, you know?
I mean, it's very hard to argue anything else, I would think, and I would be interested to know what, diehard Xbox players really feel about this. But yeah, just to look at it from the perspective of exclusives alone, PlayStation, as it has done all of this generation, has got some really interesting games in that mix there. But I think more interesting to me in some ways is that Xbox's feels kind of lacking, really, that even of those quote-unquote exclusive games, some of them are old now, really. Like, some of them are more than... Gears 5 might be termed as old because it came out like last year, but games like The Falconeer and Bright Memory are actually older games than that. Still, they've just got kind of optimized and upgraded for just now. So it doesn't feel like a launch lineup to me, really. It feels like it could easily be a list of cross-generation titles,
I would say that a lot of them are cross-generational titles. I think Yakuza Like a Dragon, I think that is going to be one of the key launch titles for Xbox. And Yakuza is a series that has massively grown in popularity over recent years. But in comparison to Spider-Man, it's not in the same ballpark, really. Even thinking about kids and young people that are going to be playing these games. Astro's Playroom is going to be on every single PlayStation 5 when you buy it, and Sackboy: A Big Adventure is going to be a very popular title for younger gamers, as is Bugsnax probably, I think the thing that excites me most about the Xbox launch title is Gears Tactics coming to console, but that again is a game that has been out for a long time now on PC. The other big hitter there is Gears 5, which again is a year old now. So yeah, I would say that I would agree with you. It does feel lacking. I think that the response to this from an Xbox fanatic would be, well, we've got Games Pass.
Yeah, well, yeah, it would be, and not even just an Xbox fanatic. I mean, that's what Phil Spencer would say to you, and it's very much what it feels like Xbox have done in terms of pivoting their approach and all their messaging around this console since the delay of Halo Infinite. They've had to talk more about Game Pass and the scale of Xbox's backwards compatibility, it should be said. It makes it on day one a completely different prospect in a certain sense, because it's easy to look at this list of games and say, oh, there's nothing much there, and why would you buy this console? Why would you pay £500 to get a console that can play Gears 5 or even Gears Tactics, which I can't imagine is going to be a huge hit or anything because of the type of game that it is. But really what you're buying into there is this huge catalogue of games. I just think, if you compare these to previous generations' launch lineups, that leaves something lacking, because what you're talking about really is getting games that are already available to you on older systems, that they are also still available, and that's not really showing off what the new system can do. But just to balance that as well, because I am conscious that it could be called Sony Ponies most often by you, it must be said, but
I'm just keeping everyone in check, Lewis. I'm just keeping everyone in check.
There's not a hell of a lot about the PlayStation launch day lineup that particularly excites me either. Like Deathloop would have probably been my most anticipated game, and you might be
not Spider-Man.
Well, yeah, I was going to say you might be surprised to hear me say that, because like Spider-Man occupies this big place in my gaming history. Like Spider-Man 2 on the PS2 was such a huge game for me, and obviously loved the PS4 one. But I'm just not massively excited right now about a sort of sequel, but sort of not, and probably quite short game that doesn't necessarily push that game's narrative, like the PS4 game's narrative forward. It feels like a bit of a step aside. I'm sure it's going to be loads of fun to play, but to me, and it's the same problem I have a little bit with the notion of a Spider-Man PS4 remaster, is that it just doesn't feel long enough since those games came out for me to be like, oh yes, I really want this now. I've not even played the DLC from the original game, so that's my one drawback. Now, I can imagine that something like Demon's Souls for you has probably shot up in excitement over the last month.
Massively recently, yes. Demon's Souls, a game I was pretty confident I wasn't going to play, it suddenly turned into an absolute must-play title for me, Liz.
And, I think one of the exciting things about this launch lineup is that there is a game like that kind of stands in stark contrast to anything else that either console is doing. As much as it's a kind of remake and a remaster, it's drawing out this type of game, which is quite a bold thing to do on a launch lineup, to put an extraordinarily difficult or potentially really difficult game as part of your launch lineup. But yeah, beyond that, The Pathless is the one there from the PS5 side that's really excited me. But
yeah, which is obviously a smaller title.
Much smaller, yeah.
As well, yeah. I suppose Godfall is one of the interesting ones here, which is something that we've not even mentioned in the slightest here, but was the first PlayStation 5 game ever announced, if you remember correctly. Yeah. But I wonder how many people will end up buying that just because it is a new shiny game on the day that maybe would appeal to a certain type of gamer, you know what I mean, would appeal to the looter shooter sort of gamer. And the game in itself does look good. I mean, in terms of visuals, I mean, it's definitely not my thing at all. In terms of the type of gamer that would go for that, I mean, looking at the Xbox side of things, like in terms of like Demon's Souls, or what Godfall's trying to do, and even like the sort of younger audience that Sackboy and Astro's Playroom will bring in, as well as like the huge heavy hitter of Marvel's Spider-Man. I mean, Xbox to me doesn't really have a response to any of that.
No, it certainly doesn't. No, and that's not to say that there aren't games that would compete on Game Pass, that in the entirety of what you can actually play on day one on Xbox, that there certainly will be games that people will want to pick up and maybe want to play more than that. But yeah, like a game like Godfall, it does kind of stand on its own amidst what's here at the moment. I have to agree, like I don't think it looks particularly interesting at all, really. Felt like it had some promise when it was first announced as well, but everything we've seen since has been quite dull. But it is a game that's there that a lot of different types of gamers might pick up for that day one. I want to get my pals together, I just want to squad up and play something, which
definitely.
I'm not sure that there's too much else there. Certainly on the PlayStation side, now that Destruction AllStars has moved, there isn't really anything in that sense. I wonder how many people are going to be tripped up by Demon's Souls, that there might be a lot of gamers out there who are getting a console bought for them, say, and that looks like the big shiny game to get because it's monsters and dragons and swords and shields.
It's probably getting a lot of discourse around it as well in gaming spaces as well.
Yeah, but people not realising like what it actually is, if you know what I mean. Like it feels like that there's a game on Xbox One, Rise, Son of Rome, I think it was called, that was just like the big graphical showcase kind of third-person action game. It feels a little bit like people might be caught out by Demon Souls in that way, that they'll just be like, oh god, this is that game, you know. But yeah, I don't know, it just feels to me like there isn't too much there on either side that is like making me really need to get one right from the launch. What's your take on that?
My take on that is that you're trying to justify to yourself not buying a PlayStation 5 at launch list. That's my take on that, because I think there are some excellent games there, quite frankly, specifically on the PlayStation 5 side. But at the same time, although I'm saying that semi in jest, I don't think that there is a particular need to run out and buy either of these consoles if you don't really, really want one, you know? If you're quite happy with your PlayStation 4 or your Xbox One, then I don't think that you have to be worrying too much about splashing down a huge amount of cash at this moment. If you can wait into next year, I don't think that you're going to be missing out on a hell of a lot, is basically what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I would basically agree with that. And I don't think yet have bought a console right at launch up until now, partly for this reason, partly just because it was up to my parents when I was younger, obviously. But I do think that there's something to be said for that like a lot of the games that we're actually really excited about, when you and I, even and on the show, we're talking about the next gen, we're not really talking about those launch day games. We're talking about what's coming further down the line. So
yeah. Speaking of that, Lewis, so talking about upcoming exclusives, right? So we're leaving Bethesda games out of this because we don't quite know where they're going to fall in the whole exclusivity line, and in actual fact, their only announced exclusives are for PlayStation at this moment in time. We'll leave them out, but obviously the Bethesda studios that has been bought by Xbox have to take major consideration in this conversation in the future, but for right now, we just don't know how that's all going to shake out. As of right now, we know on PlayStation 5 we're going to be getting God of War 2, we're going to be getting Horizon Forbidden West pretty soon, we're going to be getting Gran Turismo 7, we're going to be getting Ratchet & Clank A Rift Apart also pretty soon, we're going to be getting Final Fantasy 16 relatively soon, maybe in the first half of next year. Then there's further out things like Project Athena, which, I mean, God knows when that's actually going to materialise. Returnal, then Deathloop, which we're also getting relatively soon. Ghostwire Tokyo, and Destruction AllStars that we already mentioned had been delayed. But Lewis, on the Xbox side as well, they've got Halo Infinite, they've got Everwild, they've got State of Decay 3, they've got Forza Motorsport, they've got Scorn, which recently had a gameplay trailer put out, they've got Fable coming, but I reckon that's quite a long way down the line, they've got Hellblade 2 coming, they've got Avowed, they've got The Medium, they've got Call of the Sea, they've got Exomatic, as well as those potential Bethesda games, depending on how that shakes out again. So I have to say that on both sides, I think the future of the exclusives is pretty bloody bright. Like, I think on both sides there is a lot to be excited about, actually.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think that kind of backs up the point that I'm making earlier, that, you know, that day one purchase isn't super necessary, even though the gaming sphere will kind of make out that it is. But in 2021, assuming that most of these games hit their dates, like, there's so much to be excited for there. And yeah, like, not to be a Sony pony, I think that what Xbox has on offer is also looking really strong. I mean, Hellblade 2 would be high up on my list of all of the games that we know are coming to play. You know, I'm really keen to see a bit more of that. Obviously, Halo Infinite has the potential to be revolutionary as the original game was and be this huge system seller potentially. Doesn't really look like that at the moment, but you never can count out Halo, basically, is the point I'm making there. Fable I'm excited about. Avowed. The Medium is probably
Everwild for me as well, man. Rare's new game looks awesome as well. I've got to say, there is a narrative in the world of games that say that, oh well, PlayStation have got the exclusives and Xbox haven't, but honestly, looking at the list of Xbox exclusives that we know are coming, whether they're timed or not, are exciting, a lot of them, but at the same time, so are a lot of PlayStations, you know what I mean? Like God of War 2, Horizon Forbidden West, obviously they are the huge big hitters, Final Fantasy as well, but things like Deathloop, things like Tokyo Ghostwire, things like Returnal, I'm really excited about them as well. Like, they look awesome. So I really think on both sides here, we are looking at some really, really good games, hopefully within, say, the first year of these console releases, you know?
Yeah, absolutely that. Yeah, there's so much to be looking forward to there. I mean, that's not to mention the countless games that are on Game Pass. We've not even touched on really the PS Plus collection and the games that people are going to have access to right from day one that they maybe haven't got round to yet, in some cases on PlayStation. There's a lot there on day one. There's so much more that's exciting to come. I think that, I mean, we could do a whole discussion on just the new IP contained within these lists, because as much as it's obviously it's exciting that God of War 2 is coming, that's almost goes without saying. But yeah, like, what is Deathloop going to be like? You know, what is Returnal promising us? Is the Medium going to be the next horror franchise success story? You know, that's where my interest is in this upcoming generation, partly, is just to see, like, what are the new things that are going to get plugged into the gaming experiences that we already know well and that are going to change things and that we're going to be talking about as the generation wears on, you know? Which of these games are we going to be demanding, you know, Everwild 2, Returnal 2 or whatever, you know?
And this is without even mentioning some of the third-party games that we know is coming along, thinking specifically of, like, Immortals Phoenix Rising and the new Resident Evil game, do you know what I mean? I think that really, in the opening year of these consoles, regardless of whether you go for PlayStation or Xbox, I think that you've got a hell of a lot to look forward to. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, we will have to call it a day there. You can find PlayersToo on all the social media. That's Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, the lot. You can also find our written content over at PlayersToo.com. That's PlayerStoo.com. And if you could take 5 seconds to give us 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, it really, really, really helps us out. It does a huge amount for the exposure of the show. And I know I say it every week, twice a week, but it does not become less important on a weekly basis. While you're over there as well, if you can leave us a little review, it just helps us out even more. And thank you so much to anyone that's already done that for us. It genuinely does mean a lot. I'd like to remind everyone that our play-along game for this month is Tacoma, which I have now started now that I've finished Bloodborne.
Oh, very nice.
Yes, started it the other day there. It's not too long a game, so I anticipate getting through it pretty quickly, but already, Lewis, I have thoughts which I'm keen to discuss next week.
Good. Well, I actually have to play it in the next 2 or 3 nights because I want to play it on Xbox Game Pass on my PC, and it is being removed from the service on the 30th. Not sure if that means the end of the day on the 30th or at the start of the day on the 30th, so I categorically will play it this coming week.
Nice one. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, we will see you next week.
Thanks.